Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our latest episode of Corner Stories. Today, we have joining us MP Tracy Gray, and we are delighted to have you, particularly in your role as Shadow Minister for Small Business Recovery and Growth. We think that you probably have a lot of thoughts in terms of the convenience store industry. So what we like to do is sort of before we begin and get into the sort of meat of the issues, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on any memories or reflections of the role small businesses like convenience stores have played in your life.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. When I was growing up, I grew up in Lethbridge, Alberta. I've lived in Kelowna most of my adult life, but I grew up in Lethbridge, and I have a sister who is 1 year apart from me, and we used to go to what was called Super Sam convenience store, which was about 2 blocks away, and it was a big deal when we were able to go by ourselves without our mom or dad. And so I remember that early on that was a big step, and we would go there and buy candy, and they would have ice cream, and then we would always take our leisurely time walking back, so that we could have that time. But it was just such a great memory, and it was a big deal for us to be able to take our allowance and go and do that. And I do want to say as well in my community of Kelowna Lake Country that I visited recently the oldest convenience store that we have in the area, and it's called Knox Mountain Market. And it's at the base of Knox Mountain, and I met with the owners there, and we had a great chat, and they told me about some of their issues and opportunities, and it was so great to meet with a long-standing business like that in my community.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. And, your story is not, or your story in terms of your memories about the first visit to the convenience store, we find that that's the story for a lot of people, right? We like to call it sort of that rite of passage, right? When you're a young person and that sense of independence and the excitement of being able to go with, a little bit of money in your pocket and be able to buy a treat. So thank you so much for that. Now, in your role as the Shadow Minister for Small Business Recovery and Growth, what have you observed about how small businesses have reacted and dealt with the COVID-19 crisis? And do you think that there are any things that have kind of changed forever?
Well, thank you. And that's such an important question. I think that we've seen businesses, and in particular small businesses, just how resilient they are. And I almost want to say we are, because I consider myself, as being part of that group. I was a small business owner for a long time. I know what it's like to have everything on the line. And I will say early on in the pandemic, right in May of 2020, when everything started to happen, and, I was getting businesses, and in particular small businesses, calling every day and just feeling the panic, in their voices as to what was going on and what was happening and how they were going to make it through. And I could be very empathetic and really understand, because for myself, when I opened my business was in 2003. I opened a private wine retail business called Discover Wines. It was 100% BC wines and gifts. And I opened a month before the Okanagan Mountain Park fires came through. And that was the fire that, almost 300 homes burned. A third of the city was evacuated. Water bombers, every tourist left. And I had just opened. And I mean, literally, credit cards maxed out, all lines of credit maxed out, debt, had a young son, and, all of a sudden we had virtually no revenue, and it just opened. And so I know what it's like when you have that pang in your stomach going, like, how are we going to make it through? I couldn't hire any staff because I couldn't afford it. I was working 7 days a week because the sales just weren't there yet. We had to cancel our grand opening. Now that was about 4 months, until that ended, and then Christmas hit, and we still, then we started moving. Small businesses now have been through 20 months. So they've been through much more than what I was. But in those early times, I know what it's like, where you think, okay, this is it. I've just lost everything. So, it's really understanding where people are from, where they're coming from, the issues, and being able to help them meander through all the different programs. Now, here we are 20 months later, businesses have really adjusted. Of course, they've had more expense with all of the health and safety protocols, a lot more online versions. I think maybe it kind of pushed some small businesses or maybe micro businesses to go down that route where maybe they wouldn't have, sooner. It would have taken them longer because they had to, with home deliveries and pickups and things like that. So that was probably a big adjustment right off the bat. Right now, a lot of the concerns that I'm hearing mostly are labor shortages and trying to access labor. Of course, the cost of everything is going up, inflation, there's supply chain issues, especially in my province of BC, which are unrelated to the pandemic. That has to do with of course, with the floods and road closures. So it's still a really difficult time for small businesses. And of course, they have less resources than big companies to absorb those types of fluctuations, and many have gone into debt and haven't been able to recover from that. So it's still a really tough time for a lot of small businesses.
Absolutely. And, that definitely squares with what we're hearing from, the majority of our members, whether they're corporate or independent. They're really small, often family run businesses. And, on the one hand, they were deemed an essential service during COVID. But as you've noted, they had to pivot quickly to keep serving their customers safely. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, and it's great to have your perspective as a former small business owner, and now to be sort of on the other side and has an MP for a community, and you've watched how difficult it is, and you've lived it yourself. Can you talk about some of the policies your party will be proposing to support small businesses and help them recover from COVID?
Great. Well, that's a great question. And of course, there's lots of conversation about this right now in the House of Commons while we're sitting. So just a couple of points. Of course, we've got this labor crisis, which in particular is hitting small businesses and convenience stores and retailers. And we need to get people back to work that are able to work. So that's part of it. There's also with working visas and immigration issues, there's a lot of processing times that are taking exceptionally long. We've been pressing the government on this. They need to address this. But also there's people here, and I've heard this from a number of different organizations, including tourism organizations, where there are people here that have working visas that have expired, and they're not able to renew them. So one of the recommendations I wrote the minister along with the local tourism organization in my community to say, just extend those. These are individuals that weren't able to go back to their home country, like Australia or the UK, and then come back. Usually there's different rules. They weren't able to because of the COVID restrictions. So they're here and they're ready and able to work. Just extend their visas. This is an extraordinary situation. So that's one example. Of course, addressing inflation. We're at a point right now where everything is going up, and so for retailers, you've got the product itself, you've got distribution, and so the cost of and then of course the end user that's buying and the consumer. So inflation is probably one of the biggest issues right now, and people will be buying less because their dollars won't be going quite as far. The other part is we've said is now is not the time to be increasing taxes on for small businesses, and in particular, I've been pressing myself and other colleagues of mine that we should be holding off on the payroll tax right now. Of course, there's a need for what that is, but as of right now, while businesses are still struggling, now is not the time to increase those. And also the escalator tax, which is on excise. And so there's a number of retailers that does affect. And again, it affects restaurants and hospitality. And so any taxes that are automatic tax increases, we should be halting right now during this time.
Yeah, we couldn't agree with you more. And again, that is very consistent with what we're hearing from a number of our members. Labor, of course, is continues to be a huge issue. So we really appreciate the support of you and your party to make sure that there is a voice for small business. Another issue that I want to talk about, and I'm sure you're quite familiar with it, again, having run a small business yourself, One of the things that the pandemic has really shone a light on is the increased use of credit card fees. And so we noticed that increasingly people are using cash less, because you may recall at the beginning, people didn't really know, could COVID be transmitted by handling certain things. So cash really became something that people weren't comfortable using. So increasingly people are now using their credit card. And that's great for the convenience of the customer, absolutely. But it does mean increased interchange fees. And it's a big cost of doing business for our members. So I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit in terms of what your sort of position and how you might advocate on behalf of small businesses to ensure that interchange and swipe fees are actually addressed by government.
Absolutely. This is a very important issue, and it does cut into profitability a lot more than people might realize. I will say that just before the summer, when the pre-budget so that when we were debating the pre-budget and it was going to committee for the 2021 budget, we did, the Conservatives did a dissenting report on the budget, which did outline and did recommend to the government to exempt credit interchange fees from GST at the point of sale. So that was one specific recommendation that we made during the budget that hasn't occurred yet, but we'll continue to press on that.
That's great to hear. And that's one thing that we've really noticed for our industry. And you spoke about this earlier when you referenced the escalator tax. Of course, a lot of the products that we sell are highly taxed, whether that's gasoline, whether that's tobacco, whether that's lottery. So all of those products, that becomes a problem for us because it's almost a tax on tax. So we're paying the interchange fee on the tax component, as well as on top of the excise taxes. So in other words, it continues to be a huge irritant, and thank you for that, because we also have advocated for that, and we hope that there will be some progress made, because frankly, this is an issue that has been talked about for some time in terms of the impact of interchange fees. And obviously the pandemic, a number of trade associations like ours had to focus on other issues. But we do hope that this sort of gets back on the agenda, because it is a very important issue. Another important issue for us as convenience stores, as I said, we're a very highly regulated industry. And that's largely because of a number of products that we sell, which should be regulated, like tobacco, like vaping products. And there's also some proposed regulations in terms of what they call supplemented foods. So things like energy drinks and other products that we do sell. And what we find with Health Canada is that they often impose these regulations without really thinking about the overall impact on businesses. So how can we get Health Canada, as well as other departments, to take a little bit more of a business-friendly and balanced approach to regulation?
This is a great question, and I think a lot of it comes from tone from the top. When you look at the ministers and the government and sort of now, of course, Health Canada is separate, but they do have oversight. We should recognize the good work that Health Canada does, but absolutely there should be consultation, and we see this continually on a whole number of issues. I'm myself always pressing ministers and the government to say, who have you consulted? Have you consulted within the industry? What businesses, what business groups, or what groups in that sector have you consulted with? When I've been on committees, even this week, I was doing a debate on main estimates, and my question to the ministers were, who have you reached out to? As you're doing this. And so it's something that myself personally, I'm quite passionate about, because I've lived it on that side, being in a very regulated industry, working in liquor, having a private business. This was provincial, but the BC government would make changes that that would affect us as private retailers, going, well, if they would have just come to us, we could have maybe had a better solution, or we could have had a different way of approaching this. So I've lived through that myself, being on the receiving end. And
Right.
so that's the lens that I'm always using is, well, did you go out to the groups? And whether it's all kinds of different regulations that they might be amending. A lot of it is red tape. Sometimes you wonder okay, is this really needed? I always ask, what is the problem that you're trying to fix?
Right.
What is the problem? And sometimes people can't answer that. It's like they're trying to fix something without actually having a real problem, and it's maybe just red tape busy work. And so I think that that's really important, both from an advocacy point of view, but also looking at tone from the top. Like, how do you approach things as government to say to your different departments, this is how we're going to approach things, and this is what our expectations are. Without getting too political here, I don't really see that's not the approach that this government has. But I know that that's something that's important to me, and I know on my side of the house.
Absolutely. No, that's very helpful. And we couldn't agree with you more that, consultation is so critical. But, we have been frustrated because sometimes even when we are consulted, the consultation needs to actually matter and needs to be taken into account. And we have found there are times when, there's perhaps it's not being listened to because it doesn't fit into exactly what the government of the day is trying to accomplish on a given issue. And again, we understand it's a fine balance. We are, as I said, we sell a number of highly regulated products. And, we have an extraordinary track record as responsible retailers, which, actually leads me to my last question, which is another issue that has, been around, I feel like, since the beginning of time, but it has been around for many years. And again, one of the impacts and what we saw through COVID, we were actually getting calls from both provincial governments and the federal government because everybody had noticed that there was an uptick in terms of the taxation, the tax dollars that were coming in from cigarette sales, from legal cigarette sales. So what we saw was that the contraband tobacco market was temporarily sort of stalled, if you will. So we actually commissioned an Ernst & Young report, and we looked at. So what we concluded was that in June 2020, when we discovered that due to the closure of the illegal manufacturing operations during the pandemic, the sale of legal cigarettes was actually 24% higher nationally than during the previous month in 2019, right? So that jump really translated into a huge windfall in terms of tax revenue for the federal government to the tune of $18 million. And that's just 1 month, right? So this is like significant dollars. And I guess, most recently we've had reports right in your home province in BC, where our members are starting to notice an uptick in illegal sales, and on the flip side, a decrease in their legal sales. And I understand that there have been a number of reserves that have recently opened sort of in the last 3-4 months. And, this continues to be a real challenge for our industry. So I guess, my question to you is, do you have any ideas on what we can sort of do collectively to tackle the problem of the underground economy, and specifically from our perspective, the contraband tobacco issue? And do you think there's an opportunity perhaps for the federal and provincial government to work more closely together on this?
Great, thank you very much. And I know that upon reading that information, it was very, very enlightening. Part of that is, as I know that there's a lot of identified gangs that are involved in the contraband network. And, sort of as we look at our policies, we need to ensure that we're both with the RCMP and the CBSA, that we're giving them the resources and the powers necessary for enforcement. We should be strengthening laws instead of eliminating or reducing sentences, and and then putting the resources towards tackling gangs, gang violence, and illegal activity, and that across a whole number of of issues, that's something that the federal government can absolutely take leadership on.
That's terrific. And again, we really appreciate your engagement and working, with trade associations like the Convenience Industry Council of Canada. As I said at the outset, has somebody who has now kind of, been on the small business side and is now in government and able to influence policy and, really bring these important things into the conversation. We really appreciate, having you sort of what we say, in our corner. We say as an industry, we're on your corner and in your corner. And we're delighted to have spent a little bit of time with you and really look forward to continuing to work with you and appreciate everything that you do.
Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the opportunity, and hello to anyone that might see this. And just know that if you're a small business owner, that I'm here fighting for you.
Terrific. Thank you again so much.